Millions first discovered Baylen Dupree through viral videos showing her uncontrollable tics and unexpected outbursts. But what people saw online was only a small piece of the story. Behind those clips was a young woman who faced bullying, deep embarrassment, and years of isolation while struggling with Tourette syndrome. When she later allowed cameras to follow her life on Baylen Out Loud, audiences finally saw the emotional journey behind the viral moments. The childhood that no one realized was different. Long before Baylen Dupree became known on television and social media, she was simply a girl growing up in West Virginia in a large, lively family. Her parents, Julie and Alan Dupree, raised 6 children together, and the house was always full of noise, energy, and very different personalities among the siblings. When Baylen was around 7, her parents noticed small facial movements and occasional sounds that seemed unusual, but nothing serious enough to raise concern. For years, the tics were mild and often disappeared, so life continued normally. Baylen went to school, spent time with friends, and no one suspected that these small behaviors were early signs of a neurological disorder. Everything changed during her teenage years. Around 15, the tics suddenly returned much stronger. Her body began moving involuntarily, and words would come out before she could stop them. She also developed coprolalia, a rare Tourette symptom that causes involuntary, inappropriate words. The situation became embarrassing and confusing, especially in school and social situations. Doctors searched for answers for years, but the cause remained unclear. Finally, shortly before her 18th birthday, a neurologist recognized the pattern and diagnosed Baylen with Tourette syndrome, giving her family the explanation they had been waiting for, when the world shut down and her life fell apart. Just as Baylen Dupree was finally beginning to understand what was happening inside her own body, the world suddenly entered one of the most isolating periods in modern history. The pandemic forced schools to close, communities to lock down, and millions of people to retreat inside their homes. For many teenagers, this period was difficult and lonely. For Baylen, it became the darkest chapter of her life. The timing could not have been worse. She had only recently received her diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, and she was still trying to process what it meant. Instead of having the chance to gradually learn how to manage her condition while surrounded by friends and normal routines, she was suddenly trapped inside an environment of fear, uncertainty, and isolation. Stress is one of the most powerful triggers for Tourette symptoms, and the stress of the pandemic amplified everything. Before the lockdowns, Baylen might have experienced a small number of tics throughout the day, but as the pressure mounted and the world outside seemed increasingly unstable, her symptoms began escalating rapidly. She later described the terrifying progression in simple numbers. What once started as around 10 tics in a day quickly increased to dozens. Then the number kept climbing until it reached hundreds. At one point, Baylen was experiencing as many as 500 tics in a single day. This was not just embarrassing or inconvenient. It was physically exhausting and emotionally devastating. Everyday tasks became unpredictable challenges. Something as simple as brushing her teeth or eating a meal could turn into a struggle if her body suddenly jerked or her voice erupted with uncontrollable words. The disorder did not pause just because she wanted it to. There were moments when the tics caused accidental harm. In one incident, she involuntarily swung a frying pan and struck her mother. In another moment, she reflexively slapped her boyfriend during a sudden tic attack. These events were not acts of anger or violence, yet they left Baylen feeling deeply ashamed. Imagine hurting the people you love without having any control over the action. That emotional weight began piling on top of the physical exhaustion. Isolation only made the situation worse. During those months, Baylen withdrew almost entirely from the outside world. She avoided friends, stopped socializing, and began hiding from situations where people might see her symptoms. The embarrassment she felt about her condition grew into something darker, a deep insecurity about who she had become. When schools began reopening and students returned to classrooms, Baylen faced a difficult decision. She knew that her tics could draw attention and confusion from classmates who did not understand Tourette syndrome. Instead of stepping back into that environment, she chose to continue studying online. The decision helped her avoid public embarrassment, but it also meant she became increasingly disconnected from normal teenage life. She was no longer part of the everyday experiences that most students shared. And when the moment arrived that should have been one of celebration, her high school graduation, Baylen made another painful choice. She did not attend the ceremony. While other students walked across the stage surrounded by cheering friends and family, Baylen stayed away because she felt too ashamed of what might happen if her tics erupted in front of everyone. It was a moment she later described as one of the most heartbreaking consequences of her illness. Inside her home, the emotional toll continued to grow. Baylen began attending therapy sessions multiple times each week in an attempt to cope with the overwhelming mental pressure she was experiencing. Even with professional help, the struggle remained intense. The young woman who would later inspire millions of followers once reached a point where she felt she could no longer see a future for herself. She openly admitted later that during that period, she sometimes felt like she did not want to be alive anymore. The combination of Tourette syndrome, anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and bipolar disorder created a storm that seemed impossible to navigate. Medication helped reduce some symptoms, but sometimes intensified others, leaving doctors and family members constantly searching for the right balance. The moment humiliation turned into a turning point. For a long time, Baylen Dupree believed the safest way to live with Tourette syndrome was to hide it. She avoided situations where people might notice her tics, and she tried to move quietly through life without drawing attention. But the world does not always allow people that choice, and one humiliating moment in public would ultimately force Baylen to confront the reality she had been trying to avoid. The incident happened during a simple trip to a grocery store. Baylen was walking through the aisles when several girls from her math class noticed her. At first it seemed like nothing unusual, but soon she realized they were watching her closely. They had noticed the involuntary movements and vocal outbursts that she struggled to control. Instead of approaching her with curiosity or compassion, they began filming her. Baylen suddenly found herself being followed around the store as the girls recorded videos of her tics. They treated the situation like entertainment, capturing clips on their phones and laughing at the unexpected words and movements that Tourette syndrome forced out of her body. For Baylen, the experience felt like a nightmare unfolding in real time. She had spent years trying to keep her condition private, and now strangers were turning it into a spectacle. But the humiliation did not end when she left the store. The video spread quickly among students at her school. Within hours, Baylen began receiving messages through social media and Snapchat from people asking what was wrong with her. Some messages were mocking, others were simply confused. But nearly all of them carried the same painful implication. She had become the subject of gossip and ridicule. That night was a breaking point. For years, Baylen had been hiding from the world because she was ashamed of what Tourette syndrome made her do. She had avoided graduation, stayed home during social events, and tried to make her symptoms invisible. Yet no matter how hard she tried, the disorder still defined the way others saw her. At some point during that difficult evening, Baylen made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to hide, she would tell her story herself. A few days later, she opened the social media platform TikTok and recorded a video explaining what was happening to her. She spoke openly about Tourette syndrome and showed viewers exactly what her tics looked like in everyday life. There were no filters, no attempts to make the disorder look easier than it was. She simply allowed people to see the reality she had been living with. Her motivation was simple but powerful. She later explained that she was tired of hiding from people when she had no control over the condition. If the world was going to talk about her, she wanted to make sure they understood the truth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. What began as a single video quickly spread across the platform. Viewers who had never heard of Tourette syndrome before were suddenly learning about the disorder through Baylen's raw and honest posts. Some people were shocked by the intensity of her tics, while others were deeply moved by her willingness to share such vulnerable moments publicly. Within a short time, Baylen's account attracted millions of followers. Yet the sudden attention also came with challenges. Social media fame often magnifies both support and criticism. While many viewers praised Baylen for her honesty, others accused her of exaggerating or even faking her symptoms. Some people could not understand why her tics seemed more intense at certain times than others. What they did not realize was that Tourette syndrome exists on a wide spectrum, and symptoms can change dramatically depending on stress, fatigue, and countless other factors. Baylen faced these accusations head-on. She repeatedly explained that Tourette syndrome does not look the same for every person. Meeting one individual with the disorder does not mean you understand every case. Her own experience happened to fall on the more severe side of the spectrum, opening her life to the world. On Baylen Out Loud. By the time Baylen Dupree agreed to bring cameras into her life, she had already shared countless moments online with millions of followers. Yet social media clips, no matter how honest they were, could only show fragments of her daily reality. When the TLC series Baylen Out Loud debuted, audiences were given something far more personal, a continuous look at how Tourette syndrome shaped every part of Baylen's life. The series did not attempt to sanitize her condition or present a simplified version of the struggle. Instead, it showed the unpredictable nature of living with a neurological disorder that can interrupt even the most ordinary moments. Viewers saw Baylen navigating conversations, errands, and daily routines while managing sudden vocal and physical tics that she could not control. But the show was never just about the disorder itself. It was also about the people who surrounded her. At the center of Baylen's support system is her family, whose presence reveals a different side of the story, one that balances chaos with deep loyalty and humor. Growing up in a household with 5 siblings meant there was never a shortage of noise or activity, even without Tourette syndrome adding its own unpredictability to the environment. Her parents, Julie and Baylen Dupree, have been married for decades and raised 6 children together in West Virginia. Julie devoted much of her time to raising the family as a stay-at-home mother, while Baylen worked for the federal government. On the show, viewers quickly realized that their approach to Baylen's condition was grounded in patience and quiet determination rather than panic. Baylen often speaks openly about how complicated the disorder can be. Medication may reduce certain symptoms, but it can worsen others, especially mental health struggles such as depression. That delicate balancing act became part of the family's everyday reality. Baylen's siblings also play important roles in the series. Burke, the eldest brother, appears as he begins transitioning into adulthood and searching for his career path. Sammy, Baylen's adventurous sister, lives in another state but frequently returns home, bringing a bold and energetic personality into family gatherings. Sven's enthusiasm for sports adds another layer to the dynamic, while Vic prefers a quieter lifestyle centered on hunting, fishing, and time outdoors. The youngest brother, Becknier, brings humor and youthful energy to many moments on screen. Together, the family creates an environment that feels both chaotic and comforting. Baylen herself has described it as overwhelming at times, yet she often emphasizes that she considers herself incredibly fortunate to have such a strong support system. For viewers watching the series, this family dynamic became one of the most emotional elements of the show. Instead of focusing only on the medical condition, the program revealed how a family learns to adapt, support, and occasionally laugh through circumstances that could easily overwhelm them. Another central figure in the story is Colin Dooley, the man Baylen met through a dating app. Their relationship quickly became one of the most touching aspects of the series. Colin, a member of the United States Air Force, entered Baylen's life at a time when she was still rebuilding confidence after years of isolation and insecurity. She often describes him as a calming presence who distracts her from the anxiety that can trigger tics. In interviews, Baylen has even referred to him as the prescription she had needed for a long time, not in a medical sense, but as someone who helps bring emotional balance to her life. Their relationship reached an important milestone when Colin proposed, a moment that was captured for the show and deeply moved viewers. For Baylen, the proposal symbolized something much larger than romance. It represented the possibility of a future she once believed might never exist, a future that included independence, partnership, and a life beyond the limitations she once feared Tourette syndrome had placed on her. Season 1 of the series followed several pivotal changes in her life, including her decision to move out of her parents' home and into an apartment with Colin. After years of relying on her family for support, the move marked a major step toward independence. Yet the transition also introduced new uncertainty. Colin's military career means he could be stationed almost anywhere, including overseas. That reality brings difficult questions about the future of their relationship and how Baylen might adapt if life suddenly changes again. The darkest years. No one truly saw. For millions of viewers who discovered Baylen Dupree through social media or the television series Baylen Out Loud, the moments they witnessed often lasted only seconds. A sudden vocal outburst, an unexpected movement, or a brief tic attack might appear shocking. But those short clips could never fully capture the reality of what Baylen had endured for years behind the scenes. During a public discussion panel hosted by People, Baylen spoke openly about that hidden chapter of her life. Sitting beside her fiancé, Colin Dooley, and her parents, she described a period that was far more painful than anything viewers had seen on television. The confident young woman who now speaks openly about Tourette syndrome once felt deeply ashamed of who she was. She admitted that there was a time when embarrassment controlled nearly every part of her life. At the height of her struggle, Baylen was attending therapy 4 days a week. Each session was an attempt to cope with the intense emotional pressure that came from living with multiple conditions at the same time. Tourette syndrome was only the most visible part of the challenge. Beneath the surface, she was also dealing with obsessive-compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. The combination of these conditions created a complex battle that few people outside her immediate circle could fully understand. Medication sometimes reduced her tics, but those same medications could also intensify feelings of sadness or emotional instability. Her father, Alan, explained that managing the treatment required constant adjustments because every improvement in one symptom could lead to difficulties somewhere else. As the pressure built, Baylen reached a point where the emotional pain became overwhelming. She later revealed that during those years, she sometimes felt like she did not want to be alive anymore. It was not a dramatic statement meant to shock people. It was simply an honest description of how hopeless she felt at the time. Living with uncontrollable tics in public, facing misunderstanding from strangers, and feeling trapped inside a body that would not cooperate with her own intentions had slowly eroded her sense of confidence. Even daily routines became exhausting. Many people assume that Tourette syndrome only involves occasional vocal outbursts or sudden movements, but for Baylen, the disorder could dominate entire days. Sitting still for long periods made the tics worse, which meant that studying for school became extremely difficult. After graduating high school, Baylen had enrolled at West Virginia University with the goal of becoming a nurse. Her motivation came from years of medical appointments and treatments, where doctors and nurses had helped guide her through frightening experiences. She wanted to provide that same kind of support to other people facing health challenges. Turning pain into purpose. After years of confusion, humiliation, and emotional darkness, Baylen Dupree slowly began transforming her pain into something meaningful. The same condition that once made her want to hide from the world eventually became the reason millions of people were finally learning about Tourette syndrome. Through social media and her television series Baylen Out Loud, Baylen continued speaking openly about the disorder and the reality of living with it. Her audience grew rapidly. Millions of people followed her online, not just out of curiosity, but because they were learning something they had never understood before. Many viewers admitted that before discovering Baylen's story, they believed Tourette syndrome simply meant occasionally shouting random words. What they saw instead was a complicated neurological condition that could affect every aspect of a person's life. One of the messages Baylen repeated frequently was that Tourette syndrome exists on a spectrum. No two cases look exactly the same. Some individuals experience only mild movements or sounds, while others face far more intense physical and vocal tics that can disrupt everyday activities. She explained that meeting one person with Tourette does not mean you understand everyone who lives with the disorder. Her role as an advocate became especially visible during a controversial moment that sparked international discussion. During a major film awards ceremony, a Tourette's activist in the audience suddenly shouted a racial slur while actors were presenting on stage. The moment shocked the room and quickly triggered intense backlash online. Many people immediately assumed the outburst reflected hatred or malicious intent. Baylen decided to speak publicly about the incident. Drawing on her own experience with Tourette syndrome, she explained that tics are not thoughts or beliefs. They are involuntary neurological impulses that occur without warning. She compared them to a sneeze or hiccup, a sudden reaction the brain produces without permission. In some cases, those impulses attach themselves to words that carry heavy social meaning, including words that the person themselves would never choose to say. Her explanation highlighted an important distinction between intent and impulse. People living with Tourette syndrome often find themselves apologizing for words they never intended to speak. The fear that one unexpected moment might define them forever is something many patients carry constantly. Baylen did not deny that harmful words can still cause pain. She acknowledged that language carries historical weight and emotional consequences. But she urged the public to understand the medical reality behind Tourette syndrome and to approach these situations with compassion and education rather than immediate condemnation. This willingness to speak about uncomfortable topics became part of her broader mission. Baylen understood that every time she shared her story, she was helping dismantle misconceptions that had existed for decades. Despite the attention she receives today, she often reminds people that Tourette syndrome does not define who she is as a person. She has said many times that she is not simply the Tourette girl. She is a daughter, a sister, a fiancée, and someone who continues to build a life that once seemed impossible during the darkest years of her struggle. Her relationship with Colin Dooley has become one of the most hopeful aspects of that future. Meeting him marked a turning point in her emotional recovery, offering stability and encouragement during moments when the disorder still feels overwhelming. Their engagement and decision to build a life together represent something Baylen once feared she might never experience: independence and partnership beyond the shadow of her illness. Baylen Dupree's journey shows that what we see on the surface is often only a small part of someone's struggle. What began with embarrassment, bullying, and isolation has now become her mission to help millions understand Tourette syndrome. What do you think about Baylen sharing her life so openly? Do shows like Baylen Out Loud help people better understand Tourette syndrome? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.